In this video, we're going to be working with a file called V Lookup. But what we're going to try to do is determine the letter grade for our 20 students based upon their percent. So we need to translate what that percent is equal to as a letter grade. So our lookup value in all cases is that percent that each student received. Now, how you really go about that, the key component is to look at the table array or the underlying table. Now, the underlying table for our example is contained in the sheet called V Lookup table. That table array or underlying table is all shaded in yellow. That table array is made up of 3 columns. We have the percent column, we have the letter grade column, which is the second column, and the third column is the lookup column, where the letters are actually spelled out. Now, once again, this table array is made up of 3 columns, 1, 2, 3. That first column in the underlying table or table array is always going to contain your lookup value, what you're looking up. And the other thing to keep in mind is that first column should always be sorted in ascending order. As a rule, the second or third or fourth column, if one exists, will contain your answers or your translations. So let's go back to our example. We're going to click on Practice, back at the practice sheet. We're going to go into cell C2, and we're going to use the V Lookup to look up what those percents for each of the 20 students stand for. So f of x, V Lookup, hit OK. V Lookup is made up of 4 arguments. Argument 1 is the lookup value. So we're just going to click on the 20%, which happens to be in cell B2. Row 2 is the table array, or the underlying table. And as we've already discussed, we need to click on the V Lookup table sheet. In this area right here, we need to highlight it. That's our table array. And as we can see, that table array is in the sheet called V Lookup table in the cells A2 to C10. After doing that, and this is so important, you need to make that table array an absolute or a constant. So we're going to hit F4. So it's now a constant. For row 3, the column index is what do you want to return from that table? The answer. We want to get a translation for the letter grades, which happen to be in column 2. So that column index number, the answer, or translation, is going to be in column 2. So we're going to go to row 3, type in a 2, and lastly, the range lookup. Now, the range lookup is described right here. Do you want an exact match or an inexact match? We want, in this case, an inexact match because our table would not be listing many of these values here. A 66 or a 72. So an inexact match, by default, we could either leave it blank or we could type in true. An exact match. Click OK. And we should be able to copy that pattern all the way down. Keeping in mind, some people will notice that we have an NA here. Everything else is filled in. But if we look here, a -6, let's look at our underlying table. And when we look at our underlying table, it starts to range from 0 all the way up to 100. There are no negative numbers. So in fact, that is the correct answer. That -6 would not be applicable. Now, I'm going to go back to what we just did in the practice sheet. I'm going to highlight all that information and then delete it. And we're going to go back and we're going to look at V Lookup again, but a different way of describing our table array. So I'm going to look at our table array, V Lookup table. Let's highlight it, that underlying table. And then we're going to create a named range for that underlying table or table array. In this case, I'm going to type in just my last name. Once again, we've highlighted our underlying table. We did not highlight the headers or field names. Hit enter. Let's go back to the practice sheet. V Lookup. Our lookup value is still 20%. Our table array, instead of having to go back now to the V Lookup sheet and highlighting it, because I now have a named range, I can just hit F3, which will list my named ranges. I had McKenna. That's what I had named it. Hit OK. Column index will still be in number 2. And I still want an inexact match. So I'm going to leave it blank in this case. It's an inexact match. Hit OK. And drag down. Let's go back and look at that formula again. In this case, I'm in cell C6, f of x. Why this worked, okay? And I'm concentrating on line 2, the table array. A table array, by default, will give you an absolute value. So that line 2, a table array, which has a named range called McKenna, is once again, by default, an absolute value. So you're less likely to make a mistake because you don't have to remember to hit the F4 value to make that information an absolute. So a named range by default is an absolute value. Thank you.